Welcome to SarderTV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We have the pleasure of having Rajive Johri join us today. Rajive is a seasoned professional with deep expertise in the financial industry. He served as a board member for several public and private companies, and today he's a board member for ConAgra, a packaged food company, and he's here to tell us more. Rajive, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, yeah.
So you're on the board of ConAgra. It has a large portfolio of food brands, many well-known food brands. It's about 100 years old. Tell us a little bit more about the company.
Well, you're right. It's about 100 years old, and soon we'll have a centenary. It started in 1919 as mostly a commodity grain milling business, and then it expanded into pet care, fertilizers, etc., and almost ran into ground at one point in time. Then in 1971, Michael Hopper bought this company and immediately went into buying spree of prepared food. And he bought 100 brands. And today, and he took the company to about $24 billion in sales. And today, we have over 60 brands. And most people don't even know some of the brands they use every day are made by ConAgra Foods. Like most people use Pam, right? Chef Boyardee, everyone has, Oren Redenbacher popcorns, Healthy Choice, like that, lots, and Hunt's Ketchup. They're all ConAgra brands. And in the last 10 years, we've restructured the company in many ways. We sold off, we had a commodity trading business, very volatile, used to create a lot of, earnings volatility. We sold that business in 2008. Then a few years ago, we bought a private label business called Ralcorp. That didn't work out, so we sold it a couple of years ago and decided to focus only on consumer packaged goods. So last year, we spun off Lamb Weston, which is one of the largest potato company and the second largest potato company in the world. So now we are pure consumer packaged goods brands company. And we are valued at about $17 billion and sales of $8 billion. And our next challenge is to take it to the next level.
How much involvement did the board have in coming up with whether to restructure and how to restructure when you were going through it in 2008, as you mentioned?
Oh, the board is absolutely very, very involved because in the end, board is responsible for delivering shareholder value to our shareholders. And the company has, had a checkered record in that. It was a Midwest-based company with a lot of values to be more focused on the Midwest and do things as they were always done. Okay, and we had a CEO for 10 years, and we stabilized. We did some restructuring, but our stock price wasn't moving. We were lagging all the peers in the industry. So the board was very concerned about it, and finally we made a CEO change 2 years ago and brought in a CEO who had a track record of going into companies, restructuring them, and creating value. And we brought Sean Connolly, who's the CEO now. He came in, and within a matter of 2 years, we made major decisions which hadn't been made in almost 100 years. This was a company based out of Nebraska. One of the first things we did was we moved the headquarters from Omaha, Nebraska to Chicago. And there was a strategic reason behind it, that we could attract the best talent and get away from some of the baggage that the company had, what the businesses it had to be in, the face in the community, and so on. Now, that didn't mean that we walked out of Omaha, Nebraska. We still have, almost 1,200 people working in Nebraska. And then we started structuring and looking at the businesses and saying, we got two different kinds of businesses. One is focused on potatoes, and the other is these brands. And as a result, we were not getting the multiple on our stock. So working with the CEO and, of course, consultants and experts, we looked at various alternatives and decided to spin off the Lamb Weston company, which makes potatoes. And that only happened in November. And both the companies are suddenly valued, combined 66% more today than they were 3 months ago. Of course, that is also involved that both the companies have delivered good results. And we are further working on how do we keep on restructuring our portfolio to compete for the future of the industry, which is not a growing industry. The consumer has changed in terms of their food habits, in terms of the pantry habits. More consumers are looking at organic. The millennials, the Gen X, they are not the same as the baby boomers in terms of their choices. So to cater to them, you got to have the right kind of brands. And even some of our leading products like Slim Jim, which is a leading brand in jerkies, is getting tough competition from some of the new entrants, which are organic, with a different kind of tastes. So we've structured up, products as well, and working and improving our margins and bridging the gap between us and our peers, and the market is rewarding us for that.
Right.
So the board is really very, very engaged in every decision and involved, and we have a good CEO and a team, and the board supports them.
What was it like going through the transition of getting a new CEO? What was it like at the board level? What are some of the things that you needed to do when you were going through the process of getting the new CEO that you have in place today?
It wasn't an easy process. When we've had a CEO for 10 years and we were not delivering the value, the board was concerned that we needed to make a change. And the CEO was also ready to retire. So at that point in time, we went out to the market and looked at the broad slate of candidates. And part of the consideration was that if you're going to bring in a CEO, we got to give free rein to the person to look at the company, analyze it, bring some fresh perspective, which the new CEO did. And we were prepared for that. We were not tied down to the old way of thinking. Okay. So when the CEO came in, and one of the first things he said, I want to move the headquarters out of Omaha, Nebraska, which so far had been a no-no. Okay, the board wouldn't even look at it. In fact, we had 3 board members who were pretty senior people from Omaha, Nebraska. And, they were also, they'd been around for 15, 20 years on the board, and they decided to leave the board because the board was ready to look at every fresh idea. And they left the board simultaneously when we announced the decision to move out of Omaha, Nebraska. So, that was a pretty big thing for this company. And which meant that a lot of the key players, leadership players, had to move from Omaha to Chicago. Now, if you lived in Midwest or you know any that people don't want to move because they've got generations of family around, they like the Midwestern values, it's a nice, comfortable place. So we were prepared for the fact that many of the people that we need would not move. And we would need to hire some fresh talent, which is a good thing as well, right? Getting some fresh eyes, allowing the CEO to build his own team. What it also meant was the next layer of people, some of them would also not transition. Now, again, it was a good and bad. It was bad that we were losing some of the knowledge base. It was good that we could get some fresh talent. So, and we were prepared to do it. And we understood the risks. It had to be done in a systematic manner, a disciplined manner. And I think overall we did pretty good. We had to hire in a period of 12 months almost 400 people, which we did in Chicago.
Tell us about your role as a director of the board.
The role of the board is to represent the shareholder interest and also the interest of all the stakeholders. But the primary responsibility is to create shareholder value and give them the return. They've given the capital, they must see the return. At the same time, the board job is that of an oversight and governance and not of operating. So, I describe it saying a board member's role is nose in, fingers out. Meaning you're nosy about, what's going on, why is it going on, why is it not happening, how are you taking care of risks? So you ask all those questions. You create processes, disciplines, so that you get internal feedback, you get external feedback, and you get expert feedback on the key issues that you lay out as a board. And be very disciplined about it because you meet 5 times in person in a year and a few times in the committees. So you got to have a calendar where you are able to review and understand each of these things. Okay. So as a board member, discipline I would say is number 1. 2 is creating the right kind of charters for the committees, allowing everyone to speak, engaging not just with the CEO, but the leadership team, okay? Understanding what the investors are saying, because that's the external feedback. Then having an outside voice from industry consultants and experts. Outside feedback from investors' point of view, from investment bankers and so on. So that you get a holistic view of how your company is doing. Because otherwise you can just be, how much profit you made, how much dividend you can give, and what's the stock price. Now that is only a lagging indicator, because that's what has happened. Now the board needs to be aware of what's happening and what can happen in the future. And it is for that perspective that you need all these voices. So as a board member, unlike what used to happen 15, 20 years ago, now there's a lot of responsibility on each director. And especially after Sarbanes-Oxley, the responsibility and accountability of directors has increased. So we challenge management and we make changes when they are necessary.
What are some of the things that you think about before joining a board of a specific company?
Personally, for me, it's always been that, is it an industry which could interest me? Could I be excited about that business? Because if I can't be excited about that business, I'm not going to devote time, I'm not going to be passionate about the issues, I'm not going to learn about it. So to me, that is number one. Number two is, what kind of people are there in that company? Who's on the board? Can I work with them? Can I have fun, dealing with issues with them? Number three, what kind of challenges, regulatory, internal, going on in the company? Because, unless there are challenges, if it's going on a even keel, it's not going to be fun. Yeah, I mean, you can go there and meet some people and socialize, come back. But if there are challenges, I could bring some of my experience and contribute. And finally, can I have fun with it? So those are my criteria for looking at a board and saying, okay, this. And of course, it's very important to make sure that my calendars allow me to give my time to that board. Sometimes, and there was a time, as I mentioned to you, I was on 6 boards at one time. So it was critical for me that there were no conflicts, and it was very difficult.
What is the process that you followed to actually get onto a board?
Well, in my case, the process was purely accidental. Okay, it wasn't something that I was actively out doing. I mean, I was doing what I love to do, which is give my time to external forums, so associations, community activities, not-for-profit. I was, raising funds for United Way. I joined the board of some not-for-profits. I was visible in the community. I was part of the Chamber of Commerce and giving speeches in associations, part of the network. So I was visible. So not only I was visible in my own industry, which is banking, but I was visible in other forums as well. So as a result, I got a recruitment firm approached me to join the board of a cable company. So that's how I joined Charter Communications. Because I was visible in the community, then people would ask me to join the board of something or the other. So I joined the board of Father Flanagan's Boys Town, which is, again, a 100-year-old organization. It's a Catholic organization. I had the unique privilege of being the first non-Christian chairman of a Catholic organization ever. So I was chairman of Father Flanagan's Boys Town. But all this happened because people saw me, people met me, and they wanted me to participate. And I looked at those organizations and said, oh, this could excite me. I didn't join the board of the opera. Okay, I joined the board of Boys Town because I thought this is about children, it's about deprived children, which Father Flanagan started. I could get excited about this. So my process was more being out there, and if something excited me, I went in. And then I got these opportunities. And now, willingness, being available, and wanting to do something more than just your job, I think that's my process. But so I keep telling people, a lot of people ask me, so how do I join a board? I said, be out there, be yourself, do things. Just, if you just want to join a board, that's not enough. I tell people, I said, first articulate to me, why do you want to join a board? Is it for ego? Is it for money? Is it for pastime? If those are your reasons, forget about it. That's kind of my 2 cents on how I got it.
You have been on the board of 6 different companies at some point or another, both public and private.
Yes.
What are the differences in roles and responsibilities of being a board member on a private company versus a public company?
Well, I've been on the board of several kinds of private companies. For example, I was on the board of the bank I was working with. Now, that was privately owned, 150 years old, 5th generation bank, mid-sized bank, so $20 billion bank. Very different. Then, on being on the board of Semantify, which was a startup company in internet space. Then another company we started in India, which was a credit bureau in India, consumer credit bureau. And so these are 3 different kinds of private companies that I was on the board of. Each one is very different. Okay. In the case of Semantify, which was a startup in the US in a completely new field of deep web search or deep data, the primary responsibility was using your network to find business and help in raising money. It's in a private small company, it's more hands-on, and the line between management and governance becomes gray. So there is an operating level to it. Okay. The other one, which was again a startup, but remote in India, where I would just visit, and I helped them find the collaboration in the US and so on, and so they put me on the board. But I would attend one board meeting a year in person, the others on phone. Completely different experience. I wasn't as involved except on governance and helping them on sorting out some of the issues with regulators and their partnerships. So my role was very different there. I was kind of an expert in the field, so that was the other role there. In the bank, the description I gave you, I was the outsider. The family members on the board. So private bank, family members, yet highly regulated because you're using public money, so the OCC, the Federal Reserve is also watching you. So the responsibility to me as an outside, as the president of the bank and being on the board was very different. I had to carry the family shareholders with decisions. So it's a completely different way of handling the board. So each situation is quite different, actually.
Can you break down how you spend your time on various board activities?
Discipline and planned process in the board is very critical. Because there's so many things going on in a large organization, we divide the board work into multiple committees. So the committees focus on the issues, then they report back to the board. But the committees also have a charter so that they can have a planned agenda of what they need to cover in which board meeting on a regular basis. Obviously, there are exceptions and issues which come up and they need to be attended to in the committees and then in the board. Okay, so it changes with time, but there is a set calendar of things that board does. For example, in most boards, they have at least one of the meetings which focuses on long-range strategy for the company, and they review that every year. So that's kind of an annual process. Then there is at least one meeting in which they finalize the annual plans and the budget for the company. So that's a full board responsibility. And the other 2 or 3, depending on the board, some board meet 4, some board meets 5 or 6 times. Bank boards meet much more often because they meet almost every month. That's almost required. So the rest of the meetings are review for quarterly performance, of annual performance, of any risks. So IT agenda, new things, M&A activity, capital allocation, projects, all that is part of the calendar. Now that is if nothing unusual is going on, but there's always something unusual going on in the industry, in the company. So those issues come in to the board meeting as well. And sometimes in between board meetings, so you got calls and video conferences, all that happens. Big M&A transactions, M&A is normally part of it. How are you growing the company organically as well as through M&A, or you're doing divestitures? So That sometimes happens in between the board meetings, but mostly you already know what is being considered because that's part of the board process of capital allocation. So that's how we divide the work. And then we divide because there's so much focus on human resources and compensation. That's an important committee of the board. The audit committee, finance committee, sometimes audit and finance are together. Risk committees, which typically reports into audit committee, except in financial services, where there's an independent risk committee because their business is risk. So we make sure that the committees, and then you have the nominating and governance committee, they look at governance items, proxies, the process of refreshing the board, getting new, and even selection of CEO. So we form special committees sometimes, whether it's for M&A, maybe for a legal issue, maybe for some whatever. So we make sure that there is the right amount of focus on different issues, either through committees or a subcommittee of the board, and then following a calendar and even the charter and calendar is approved by the full board.
We've seen a slew of organizations who have been mired in scandal over the years, be it Volkswagen, be it Enron years back, Wells Fargo more recently. What happens when boards fail?
Now, that's a leap. When companies fail.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Companies make big boo-boos, right? Like some of these that we talked about. Sometimes oversight of the board, and they have missed something. Okay. Sometimes the boards didn't create the processes that I described to you to create enough checks and balances to know if things are going out of ordinary, the board should get to know. Sometimes the boards are just misled. Okay. So all these things happen. Okay. Now, there have been failures of companies. The consequences of some of these mistakes, and whether they're misses of the board or the management or whatever, are very serious for the shareholders because they can lose all their value. There can be criminal and civil prosecution of the company and individuals. So consequences are severe. And what has happened in the last 15, 16 years with Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulations, the accountability on the board has increased. A lot of people today are scared of being on the board for that reason, because individual directors are individually responsible. Okay. So a lot of companies do not allow their CEO, in fact, most companies today don't allow CEOs, their sitting CEOs, to join more than one other board because it's a lot of work and they don't want their CEO to be distracted. It wasn't like that 20 years ago. CEOs used to sit in 3 boards, 4 boards, and it was 4-hour meeting and that's it. But now there's a lot more work and is required. So when boards miss something, and it has happened, you talked about Wells Fargo, there are cases of whether it's in Citibank, whether it's in JP Morgan, financial services are better publicized today than some of the other stuff, Yahoo, whether if you lose 500 million names and credit card numbers are compromised through some company, whether it's a retail chain or whoever. These are serious issues for the company. Now, sometimes, despite everything that the board does, they still happen because it's a cat and mouse game, especially in the high-tech industry where stuff happens. So the boards have to be constantly trying to be ahead of the game. And it is in that context that the boards sometimes need to have experts on the board for risk. And sometimes even when they have experts on the board, they need to have an external perspective. So experts, there are organizations like Protiviti and cybersecurity experts and food security experts. You've got to ensure that you're listening to them and getting some kind of an independent audit of the company to find out where are the emerging risk areas. The old risk areas, you go in, everyone talks about how they manage risk, but there are emerging risks. So I see this in the banking industry all the time, that every 10 years there is a change of generation and they forget all the previous lessons and they start doing the same thing all over again. And the cycle has just begun.
Can you simplify some of the key concepts involved in how you come up with the company's valuation.
Actually, if you go by Warren Buffett's valuation of the company, he says, I don't know what they teach in the business schools. I can teach somebody in an hour. That's what Warren Buffett says all the time. And the valuation of a company is nothing but is cash flows, future cash flows discounted to today's value, present value. That's what it is. So if the company is valued 10 billion and it's making $1 billion a year, that'll be discounted for foreseeable future to today's value. And that's what it'll come to. Now, of course, then the finer details of what is cash flow and what is operating cash flow and investing cash flow. But essentially it is that's what the amount of cash the company is going to generate, and that's what it's worth. The analyst community looks into the proxy statements and the income statement and takes into account all the details and the risks, and they'll compare it to the industry and understand that if a company may be making $1 billion in this year, what is the likelihood that it's going to make 1.1 or 1 or less in the future years? Despite what they say, because they also talk about the risk, they look at the industry. Is it a growth industry? Is it a consolidating industry? Is it a shrinking industry with a lot of threats of new customers? I mean, just to take an example, not too long ago, if I go back only 5 years, BlackBerry, RIM, that's the name of the company, they were valued something like $70 billion or something. Today it's worth almost nothing. And they had market share, I believe 85% market share of the enterprise business. And they wouldn't change as a result to a keyless smartphone. But they lost out. And people who were valuing the company, they were looking at their cash flow statements and projecting it for more years than was possible. So the extraneous view which needed to be applied to it was, what were the threats to this company, this business? The companies just went off. It's like Motorola in the cell phone business. I mean, if you just look at recent history, you don't have to go more than 10 years, you'll find tens of companies who were leading stars in valuation and today are worth almost nothing.
So specifically for some of these companies, you think it was an outside voice, an outside analyst, an outside expert that should have been called in that wasn't? Is that where they failed to see what was coming?
I think there is one more factor which happens. Success creates arrogance. And most successful CEOs find it hard to contain their arrogance. And in the process, they become insular from the industry. Even though the experts tell them, they find a way to rationalize against it. Everyone is telling BlackBerry that there is enterprise and there are consumers. Individuals work in the enterprise. If they like Apple, it's only a matter of time. But people are not willing to listen to that voice. I mean, you can apply this to Yahoo, you can apply this to so many companies, you can apply this to Wells Fargo. It's not that Wells Fargo didn't know that this was going on. When we were working in the different banks, and there was in JP Morgan Chase or Citi or First National Bank, regulators used to tell us, why can't you have a better cross-sell ratio like Wells Fargo? And we knew what Wells Fargo was doing. And we couldn't come to do it. And Wells Fargo was touting it in every forum that, look, our cross-sell ratio is 8 accounts per individual. And we knew how difficult it is to go beyond 3 or 4 without doing other stuff. So in that case, chairman and CEO is the same person in the banks, and they're resisting it. The board was comfortable with the performance. The company was doing great. Stock price was great. Revenues are coming in. Customer feedback was being shared. Customer satisfaction was high. These are all tools to prove your own proposition. You always need a voice of dissent. And sometimes that voice of dissent is not heard. So a few times that I've been chairman of the board, or even in businesses if I chair, I always look for the voice of dissent. And it's so important to hear that. And sometimes that is missed. I mean, I'm not saying people do this intentionally, but it does get missed. And it can have very serious consequences, as you can see with Wells Fargo.
What are some of the non-financial indicators of good business performance that you look for?
Well, one of them I think I mentioned is customer satisfaction, quality. Do you have quality issues? Looking at internal audit issues. How long does it take for the company to resolve those issues? How many of them remain outstanding? Do you have a high turnover in your internal audit team? These are some of the non-financial indicators. Your leadership team turnover. So these things give you an indication of something happening. Market share. If your market share is falling, okay, or you're lagging behind peers, that can be an issue. If you can see growth rates below industry levels, that's a warning bell. If the industry is consolidating and you're not participating, there is something wrong. Why is nobody interested in you, either as a buyer or a seller? They know something which you don't. So, there are a lot of stuff which you can get in the financial world. Now there's a whistleblower stuff, so that's against risks which are going on. Now, board needs to be aware of what kind of comments are coming in. A lot of them are anonymous, despite all the systems. They're anonymous, which is okay. And a lot of times, the anonymous comments don't get the same treatment as an identified one. But boards need to be aware and conscious that sometimes a very small thing can become big.
What are some issues that boards have when it comes to handling risk as it relates to business projections?
It's a very good question because if you look at, we talked about leading indicators and lagging indicators. The leading indicator is something which points to a risk going forward. So if your trend is that you're growing at 3% for the last 3 years, quarter after quarter, and now you have a plan in front of you which says you're going to grow by 18% in the third and fourth quarter, it just stares at you as a risk. So why is it that suddenly something will change so dramatically? And now you always get an explanation. We launched that product, and that product is going to give us this extra growth. But you have nothing to base it on except hope or maybe a test. So that's a huge risk. Now, if you're basing a lot of capital on it, and if that's your only thing, then that's not a risk you should be sleeping with. If you have 10 such things going on, and you can say, all right, you're taking a risk with 10 things, and maybe 2 will work. And if it still gets you to a reasonable place, that's all right. So you can see some of these risks now, for example, let's take another one. People come up and say, we are going to restructure the way we sell, because we got this brainwave and consultants have told us, and we have the right team to do it. Now, when you go through such a major transformation of your sales team, which involves supply chain and others, how they're going to interact, how the marketing is going to work with them, it creates a new risk. And if you're putting all your bucks on it, you've got to watch out, because success rate is not based on what happened in the past. So you've got to say how much has it been tested? Have you done it in a smaller way? Did it work? What did you learn? And you've got to ask those kind of questions.
How does the board assess a company's internal controls effectiveness, considering such things as changes in business model or changes in fraud risk or resource constraints? Tell us about some of those things.
One of the tools is internal audit. So you are constantly looking at the internal audit charter and saying, how are you going to audit? Something new we're going to do. So how is that going to be audited? So they're kind of an internal, independent tool to check on that. But even before that, your risk committee, which you form with the approval of the board, is to identify anytime you launch a new business, new product, anything, you say, so what are the risks in this product? Is it in manufacturing? Is it in systems? Is it in accounting? Is it in wastage, packaging? What is this? And you dimension those, and then you put the internal audit to start looking at those. 3, you get an independent review from an external expert company, whether it's a consultant, whether it's an organization like Productivity, and there are many others. So you get it looked by somebody else as well and say, okay, are we doing all the things that we need to do? And because some of these consultants have worked with others with similar stuff, and they'll bring in a perspective that you don't have today. Okay, or the salesperson of this or the project leader of this is not presented or is not aware of. So you bring in different voices to find as many perspectives, and then put in a check and balance on it to see that we'll keep measuring it, and you ask them to report it. So how are you progressing on it?
Tell us how the audit committee can continue to improve its oversight when it comes to the company's risk management policies and programs, specifically around compensation and the risks around compensation in an organization.
The risk around compensation and the operations of the company is the primary responsibility of the compensation committee, not of the audit committee. So that's where we look at it. When we look at the reward structure, both the annual reward structure, performance-based, the stock award, the bonus, and the long-term incentive plans, and the metrics against it, we look at it to see that can this create an unnecessary incentive which creates a new risk, like in the case of Wells Fargo. Their reward scheme for their, and that was more a sales reward, and the bonus reward for the retail people, which created that problem. So we are very conscious of saying if we are going to, for example, reward only the revenue line, then people will do stuff to get the revenue and no margin. Okay. We should be rewarding people for the right outcome for the shareholders. So we are very conscious of in the HR committee to look at how this reward structure is going to impact the CEO, the leadership team, and the people who deliver the results. And to make sure that we know all, because we don't know all. I mean, we have management presenting something, and the committee is looking at it. We have external consultants who are independent from the management. They don't have any other business with the company. They also do not have a relationship with the board members. So there is a legal requirement to make sure that your compensation consultant is independent. And they bring in a lot of experience because they're working with so many different organizations, and they can point out, and we ask them the question saying, all right, if you're going to incent this, what risk can it create in terms of behavior? So we look at that. I mean, it's a very serious subject, and we look at it very deeply in the compensation committee.
What kinds of competencies are required to be a board member in today's environment?
I think breadth of experience, depth of experience, long enough experience, so that you can understand different perspectives without getting just too focused on your own point of view. You listen, the ability to listen to different perspectives, discuss it, question everything, and then come to a decision. It's very important, and it comes with time. It comes with, having that breadth and depth of experience. Then giving the time. It's not just the board meeting. And preparation for the board meeting is 10 times more, because you got to read all the stuff which the company presents. You have to read what the analysts are saying about the company and the competitors. That's a lot of work, because you got to prepare. And thirdly, you need to remain fresh about governance perspectives by networking with other directors outside the company There are enough forums available, the associations, and you go there. Then you have director education. So, I mean, I go every year to, whether it's Harvard Business School or somewhere where they have a directors meeting for 2 or 3 days, and you spend time with people and see what are the emerging issues which other boards are looking at. So you try to understand what's going on in the world, not just in your own company. And then talking to the experts, because, as I was telling you, investment bankers and consultants, when they come in, of course, some of them have their own agenda, but you use that time to question them. One of the new things which has happened, which is a recent thing in the last few years, is the whole activist phenomena. Activist shareholders are coming in. We have an activist shareholder involved with ConAgra now for the last couple of years, but we have a standstill agreement with them, and they're happy with what we are doing. And a lot of people resist activist shareholders. But activist shareholders bring in fresh eyes. And their objective is the same. They want to add shareholder value. Now, you may not agree 100% with the how of it, but the objective is the same. And so getting to listen to everyone is a very important part of being a board member. And then using your own experience and your ability to analyze and solve problems and putting your perspective forward. Because again, I mean, one of the things you learn over a period of time is how do you articulate your point of view so that people can understand, and I may or may not agree, but at least you make your point.
What are some of the things that you look for when you're hiring a CEO, some of the characteristics and traits?
You want somebody who is passionate about taking on the challenges, okay, has a proven track record of delivering consistent results, who understands how to lead, because the CEO cannot do stuff himself or herself. So he or she needs to be somebody who's managed other people delivering results, who has the ability to communicate internally and externally, and then be able to make tough decisions which can impact his or her own compensation. Okay, but do the right thing. Okay, so integrity is very important. Ability to carry the board and carry a team, very important. So you got to look at all these skills, and then do a lot of reference checking. Before you hire a CEO, you check with a lot of people, not just the recruiter who's found them, because he's going to make money, he or she is going to make money anyway. But you spend enough time and give the time for the nominating committee to interview the candidate, then the full board, each member of the board meeting the candidate. Then you come back and discuss all the pros and cons of different candidates, and then say, what do we need at this point in time? Do we need a stabilizer? Do we need a transformational leader? What do we need? And then you hire the person.
And what role does the board have in succession planning at the C level?
One of the most important roles the board plays is hiring the CEO. Okay, that is hiring and firing and supporting the CEO is one of the top 3 roles of the board. Now, when you hire a CEO, you need to ensure the CEO gets the team the CEO wants. But you also need to make sure that you have people in the organization who can fill up the gaps. So the CEO gets hit by a bus, God forbid, then what's your succession planning? Similarly, succession plan for each of your senior leadership, president of different businesses, CFO. So you got to have a very robust, disciplined process, which is once again normally it starts up in the HR and comp committee, where talent, how do you manage your talent, your senior leadership team succession planning, their development plans, ensuring that they have the right kind of coaching and mentorship, a robust process of evaluating not just their performance for rewards, but looking at their potential, whether this person has the potential of doing another job. so that the person can have a breadth of experience and then be considered for CEO? Or is this person, even in a few years, be a candidate for CEO? Doesn't have to be the only candidate, but so the process is pretty robust. Most companies have delved into it, and it can only keep getting better. So HR committee and then the board actually gives it to the HR committee and then reviews it once a year.
Tell us a little bit about the culture of the board and how you handle interacting with a group of your peers to make these important business decisions.
Well, there are different views on what the board interaction should be. And there are some experts, and there was a Professor C.K. Prahlad, I don't know whether you heard of him. He used to be a big professor in University of Michigan, a consultant to boards, consultant to companies, came out of India from IIM Ahmedabad, and then he was teaching here, very well-known person. And I happened to work with him on a couple of projects once. And his view was that board members shouldn't interact with each other. They should be focused on the work and the business, challenge each other, and it wasn't necessary to be collegial. Okay. And then there are the people on the other side who feel that boards should be very collegial and they should be close enough and the chemistry should be good so they can discuss issues without being disagreeable. They can disagree, but they didn't have to be disagreeable. And so these are the two extremes of the spectrum. Okay. And I kind of first felt that CK was right, but pretty quickly I realized he wasn't. Okay. I also happen to have worked with another great board consultant who, as it happens to be an Indian as well. Ram Charan, very well-known personality. He used to be consultant to boards of GE, of Citi, and many other CEOs. And I was lucky enough to get a chance to work with him for 6 months 25 years ago when he was a consultant to our chairman of Citigroup. And what I learned from him was, how do you extract value from a board? Because people on the board are very senior professionals with tremendous amount of experience of coming from different industries, different backgrounds, and you put them in a room, and if all they did was to come and do checklist stuff and then play golf and have a drink in the evening and go away, then you didn't get anything. So you had to be very clear as a chairman to extract best value out of them. Okay. And I found that the only way you could do that was the board could feel the freedom to socialize and interact on issues without being judgmental. So the short of that is that the peer level interaction should be sociable. Okay. People should be free to express. They should be allowed to say if they disagree. And then in the end, build consensus around whatever decision they're taking.
Now you mentioned specifically for an organization like ConAgra, where there are so many changes in consumer tastes and millennials wanting one thing and baby boomers having different tastes. And we know the board is obviously made up, like you said, of senior professionals who have years and years of tremendous experience. But isn't it important to have somebody like a millennial on your board to be able to balance some of the the information exchange and give you an idea of what's going on in the industry, so you can make the decisions that you need to at that level?
I think the crux of your question is absolutely correct, that the board needs to have a perspective of all segments of its customers when they make decisions. Now, whether it should be part of a board member is a different matter altogether, because you can argue that every function should be represented on a business, human resources, finance, marketing, IT, and then suddenly or different kinds of customers. You should have older generation, younger generation, upcoming generation, kids. Well, suddenly you'll have 100 people board. It's just not feasible. What is important is that every perspective must be recognized and be considered in decision making. And the board should be aware of what is present and what is not. The board should be aware of what is the critical skill matrix you need for that company at that point of time. And as a result, we do make changes in the board. Our board, every member is re-elected every year, unlike most other companies where it is generally 3 years. And the reason for that is that if we need to refresh the board, we can refresh the board based on the skill required, based on what's going on in the company. Okay. So we do bring in experts, whether they're consultants, and we talk to our marketing heads because they come in to the board as to how do they get the information, and they use obviously sophisticated analytics and market research to find out what the consumers need. Now, for some other companies, whether it's a Facebook or Snapchat, maybe it is more critical to have on the board itself somebody who represents that voice, because their customer base is 70-80% and growing from that generation. So maybe there it makes a little more sense. But I mean, for example, I used to be on the board of a cable company, Charter Communications. Now you got customers who are 80 years old and 90 years old, and you customers who are, watching Disney Channel. But we didn't need them on the board. The older ones happen to be on the board anyway. So I would say all perspectives are needed, and as long as the board is aware and is considering it, it is not necessary that everyone should be on the board.
Okay, I want to ask you a little bit more about corporate governance. So can you first start off by defining what corporate governance is?
As I mentioned, governance is having an oversight. You essentially allow the people you selected as management to operate the business, to deliver the results that you agree with, which are in tune with what the shareholders expect, right? And after that, your job is that having given them the playground and the boundaries, to make sure they operate within that and constantly keep telling you that that's what's going on. You lay down the metrics, they report, and you're all the time looking, is it working in that direction or not? If not, what are the changes? So essentially, it's that of oversight. As I earlier described, I said it's nose in and fingers out. So you're very nosy about everything, but you're not trying to do the job. Okay. So that is governance. But having said that, it's not just about delivering results for the shareholders. It's also being a responsible corporate citizen. That means you take responsibility for all the other stakeholders, regulators. If you don't, then you may not be allowed to operate. Okay? So you got to understand what are the regulations around your business, how are you dealing with them, what is the interest of customers, are we achieving these results at the cost of customers? That can't be a long-term strategy, right? Are we doing it at the cost of employees? So, community. So when we grew up, I remember we used to look at 5 things. And it was shareholders, community, customers, employees, and government, regulators. So those are your 5 stakeholders. You had to take care of them. A very simple business model. So as from the governance point of view, you got to make sure that these stakeholders' interests are being considered in decision making. And it's not just one, which is what for a period of time happened, and as a result, a lot of people have suffered.
So can you lay out a framework for strong corporate governance based on some of the things that you said?
The strong corporate governance would mean in that create the right committees so that we have focus on those issues. Of course, law governs that you got to have audit committee and the comp committee. Nominating governance committee. Risk committee if you need one. Finance committee if you need one. And then ensure that they have the time and the right people on those committees. Not just to put check the checklist, but to have the right framework for them. And then giving them the opportunity to bring the issues to the main board. So creating this time and space in the board to listening to them. Okay. So committee structure is very important. And then having the board calendar so that people are prepared for those issues which are going to be discussed. I remember before the electronic media came along and everyone now has board diligent or board books on their iPads. So we just take the iPad with us. We used to get board books which are this thick. And they would typically come 2 days before the board meeting. So today, that isn't the case. You get it electronically, It's available at least a week in advance so that every board member can prepare. So, I've seen it's becoming better, that boards are provided material in advance. Number 3, board is given the opportunity and exposure to the leadership team and their second level periodically. So they're meeting with the players who are actually doing the work, and they have the ability to interact with them, not just in the boardroom, but socially in the evenings as well, to know who they are, not just seeing the profile on a piece of paper. And that helps in understanding and relating to what, when the CEO or somebody is presenting and telling you about somebody, you can relate to that. To me, that's a very important part of governance. Number 3 is having the ability to invite experts, whether they're legal, investment bankers, consultants, if the board members have questions. That is made available. So that's part of governance, that if I go and say, I want to talk to somebody independent, that's a right I have as a board member, and the company makes that available. So these are the ways to create the right framework for the board to feel comfortable that all the issues are coming up with them, and they have the opportunity to discuss and make a decision. No decision should be, there are some decisions which get made in between board meetings with the executive committee. The chairs of committees are typically part of the executive committee along with the CEO. Now, it's very important as part of this framework that those decisions are ratified in the board. So that the full board, even though they've delegated the authority to the executive committee to decide, but the board should get material and an opportunity to see why and what was decided.
Now, would you say that strong corporate governance can also lay the framework for strong investor relations?
Yes, it absolutely is, because investors look for strong governance. They look for, is the board active and is pushing the management to create maximum shareholder value without taking undue risk. Okay. So the framework which is described, the committee framework, the charters, it's all part of the proxy statement. And making sure that the CEO and the investor relations department is constantly interacting with the investors. We have investor days, talking to analysts. We invite analysts to the board meetings once in a while to tell us their perspective of what they see. We go through their reports, they're circulated. So making sure that, because you don't want to be surprised at the annual shareholder meeting. So you look at ISS, what is their recommendation, and what is our point of view. You discuss that in the governance committee. These are all ways of making sure that you're doing the things based on what the investors in the market is demanding. Now, sometimes you don't agree with everything, but when you don't, you have a strong enough case to deal with it. So being responsive to the investor community is a very important thing, because they are the ones who can move your multiple.
The board of directors is the first line of defense against risks. Do you agree with that statement or disagree?
I agree partially with that statement. I wouldn't say it's the first line of defense. I think it's one of the key lines of defense. Management is the first line of defense, because management is operating with the risk. Okay. Board is creating the framework and oversight, but risks are emerging every day. So sometimes board may not even be aware of what has happened and reads it in the press. That's the very unfortunate situation that I described. Yes. So the idea is not to be defensive about risk. The idea is to take appropriate risk with checks and balances on it, because you can't make money and deliver results without taking risk. But are you taking sufficient but not too much risk? What is the definition of that? And it's a debatable thing. You cannot quantify it. So the board plays a very important role in that with management. And that's why the Enterprise Risk Committee and the Risk Committee are reporting to the board periodically, and depending on the business mix, It may be monthly, it may be annually. That's a different thing. But the board, one of the key responsibilities of the board to make sure that the appropriate risks are being articulated and addressed and reported back.
Right.
As far as the defense is concerned, all boards, and we recognize that sometimes things will go wrong. So it is the board's responsibility to ensure that the management has a plan. If and when something happens, how do you respond to it? It could be an emergency, it could be an accident, it could be product going bad, it could be any of those things. But does the management have a plan to address it in a professional manner? And to that extent, I think it is the board's responsibility to ensure that there is a plan.
Any other best practices that you and your board members have implemented just to ensure maximum board effectiveness that you can talk about?
What certainly I do, and I've encouraged, and we've done a few times, the industry has these industry analyst conferences annually. And I might make it a point once in a couple of years. Management goes and presents, and all the other companies are there of the industry presenting to the analyst group and seeing what's going on. I make it a point once in a couple of years to go and attend those and listen to the other competitors, what they're doing, what they're saying to the analysts, and what kind of questions the analysts are asking them and to us. Okay, so I get a personal feel for it. Sometimes I go and attend investor days and listen to the analysts asking our people. And I've encouraged my whole board. So sometimes we have a board meeting around the analyst meeting, and some of the board members go and attend. So, but as a principle, we don't talk to the analysts. The line of communication is through the investor relations to the company and the CEO. The board is not supposed to talk to them. But these are the opportunities where you go and listen to them. Okay. Sometimes we bring in experts of a field to come and talk to the board. So, for example, I've suggested recently that we're going to invite a cybersecurity expert to come and talk to the board and tell us what somebody from outside who's an expert in that field, tell us what should we be looking for in our business.
These are all the things that the board does. How does a board's performance get assessed?
Collectively, the board performance and the company performance is almost synonymous. If the company is doing well, it means the board's doing well, right? So what's the definition of company doing well? It's not just delivering your quarterly results. It's ensuring that it's sustainable. It's ensuring that it's predictable. It's ensuring that it's growing in line or better than the industry and peer group. It's ensuring that you're leading the company towards the future. Now, all that is the responsibility of the board. Now, how do we assess the board's performance? So the analyst community and the stock market tells you how you're doing at that point in time. But just because you're not doing well at a point in time doesn't mean the board's not doing well. Board may still be working and planning so that 2 years or 3 years or whatever the time frame, you'll catch up and start doing okay. So how do you do that? You are on an annual basis, we evaluate the performance of the board through a self-assessment, through a peer feedback, and within the committees. The chairman speaks to every board. We fill up questionnaires and say what we are doing okay as a group, what we are not doing good as individual or otherwise. That becomes part of a feedback mechanism. The intention there is not to penalize anybody, but it's just how do we improve and become an constantly improving board.
All right, Rajive. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time on SarderTV.